Geren Scoggins Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. In combating the liberal Democrats' spin, they were a Karl Marx-oriented society, even giving out books of Das Kapital, free on government money to the German people, to propagandize them with liberalism and political left ideals. Redistribution of the wealth, as Karl Marx is quoted from Das Kapital. Socialism. The socialism bred the racism. They refused to blame the socialism for their government's bankruptcy. Rather, they chose to blame foreigners, minorities, and the Jewish people of whom they falsely accused of running all the banking systems and having bankrupted them during the First War. We saw a lot of this racism come to pass here in the United States when our state socialized medicine went bankrupt. Many here in the state of Tennessee and in other states across the whole United States blamed the people coming in from Mexico for bankrupting their system. Remembering, instead of blaming the socialism, they blamed the racial minorities and foreigners, as they always have. One should realize the real culprit and problem is that socialism does not work. Karl Marx was wrong. Every country that followed Karl Marx and redistribution of the wealth, socialism, went bankrupt. Many in our country tried to defend socialism by bringing up Canada and Europe and saying how they prosper. Make sure it's noted that they always leave out that the reason those socialist nations in Europe and Canada and other countries that are socialist are prospering is because our nation has been giving them billions of dollars every year for over 50 years now, without getting any of that money back in return and without a demand that their government turn to a capitalist nation so that they can support themselves financially and we can stop bailing them out. Again, in order to have fascism, one must first have socialism. Socialism with the government entwined with private corporations create fascism. Again, the private corporations are there because they have and are providing so many things for their people through such large socialism that they're having to bring in private corporations in order to provide these items, such as the car. Adolf Hitler referred to Volkswagen as the people's car, and it was paid for on the people's money, leading to the hatred towards those that were considered not producing enough. The ugly statement, useless eaters, was then tagged on to the poor people in Nazi Germany that were too sick to work. This kind of hatred, built up towards people that cannot pay in enough to the state, is permeating socialism in the United States as we speak. Again, when our state socialized medicine failed, who took the blame? The minorities and the immigrants, rather than the fact that socialism does not work and that it's going to go belly up. These are just excuses to cover up for the fact that they were brainwashed by their own liberalism. They refused to admit they were wrong. It began to create class warfare in Germany. There were other liberal ideals pushed in Germany other than just fiscal. Much of it pertained to bringing in a New Age movement, paganism. It wasn't just bringing back the Norse god worship, but bringing in Hinduism and Middle Eastern ideologies. Spiritual evolution, where a spirit comes to earth and through a process of reincarnation, moves up through the species, constantly evolving higher, through the species called transmigration, into a human, and by their false religion, then on into a god. The racist aspect of this religion is when the spirit reaches the human stage, they taught a lie that the spirit would go through the minority races first, as they were considered subhuman, and then up into the Caucasian race. If you remember, Charles Darwin, in his book In the Descent of Man, says, quote, the Caucasian race was the highest evolved race. And later on in the book, he states, eventually the Caucasian race will annihilate the lesser evolved races. He is showing his belief in racist spiritual evolution teachings. This is found in Hinduism. The darker-skinned people in India are the lowest class. They have a class system. Their highest class, the Brahmins, are the lightest skinned. Their religion was so integrated into their state that they went by families' last names to say which social class they were going to be put in. The decision of which social class their family was put in was made based on how highly evolved they believed their family to be. The Brahmins were thought to be the highest evolved and a god on earth. This New Age theology has a racist tenet involved, and it was ushered in by the Nazi Party. Again, it's standard New Age theology. It is also found in some aspects of Wiccan faith, in where they're taught their familiar spirit is a lesser evolved spirit and could be, quote, a lesser evolved human spirit. Wicca and the New Age movement and Hinduism permeated pre-Nazi Germany upon this ideal. And this is a very little known fact. Many have purposefully left this out of the history books. We're already seeing the end result of this revisionist history by Democrat liberals in our school system, leaving out the pertinent facts of why Nazi Germany happened the way that it did. Case in point, the MTSU Student Pagan Organization. They stated to me clearly they accepted any religion except for Christianity and Judaism, and went on to say, how could I possibly believe that I had the, quote, only path to God? It came out in the newspapers in Munich, in pre-Nazi Germany, that they were accusing the Jews and Christians of being, quote, arrogant for saying that they had the only God. You hear these same sayings that came straight from the Nazi newspapers here in the United States in our liberal Democrat-ran universities. It was illegal for us to have teachers' unions. Our founding father says we weren't even supposed to have state-ran schools because they would become a political propaganda outlet, and they most certainly have. The National Education Association is illegally on the Democratic Party membership list. Bush had to pass a law that it was illegal to force people to join a teachers' union because they were so liberal and Democrat. It opposed their Christian religious faith. In other words, they were going to be forced to join a group that supports abortion and gay marriage and have their Christian civil rights violated. Teachers' unions are unconstitutional. And in this we see why. Liberal biased propaganda in the school system, purposefully leaving out facts, such as Nazi Germany being liberal. Compare their party platform, the Nazi Party platform, to the Democratic Party platform of today. You see gun control. Adolf Hitler brought in the first ever gun control. You see large socialism and the push to blame minorities when the socialism does not work out, when they bankrupt, as they will and do. Teaching Karl Marx redistribution of the wealth, Adolf Hitler made sure Karl Marx's books Das Kapital was given out free to every person in Germany, and their Bibles taken up and burned. Lies that Nazi Germany happened because of Christians, knowing that it was a New Age movement of neo-paganism. Again, another group that the liberal Democrats protect, all while they Christian bash. This is revisionist history, and the truth needs to be brought out. The Democrat liberals, in trying to coerce the public against Christianity, are now even blaming Christians for the need for a women's rights movement and are trying to stigmatize Christians as racists. It was Christian ministers that brought in the civil rights movement. How many Baptist preachers stood up, like Martin Luther King Jr., against racism? It was the Baptist church and the Christians that stood up against racism to begin with. They were planning the marches. Those were Baptist ministers. How can they now turn and lie and say the Christians were at fault? They were supposed to be the racists. Adding to that, women's suffrage was started by women ministers such as Amy Semple McPherson, and also women ministers such as Catherine Kuhlman. Vast ministries where women stood up and preached the gospel and also pointed out that there had been a double standard. Again, this was a move by liberal Democrats to try to coerce the population against Christianity. They even wanted Christians to take the blame for the gay rights movement not getting, quote, federally protected class status, when it was the American Medical Association coming into the federal Supreme Court and saying that there was no gay gene, no clump of gay genes, nor any epigenetic markers cutting on a gay gene. They went over all of the studies, which showed, moreover, that there is no gay gene, that they're not, quote, born gay. This was taken to blame the Christians for this happening. Evidently, the Democrats and the liberals really believed that they were going to do more and more studies and it was going to prove they were born gay. And when the opposite happened, they were going to blame the Christians. Again, stirring up hatred against the Christians. Every time I saw a news story that had to do with the gay rights movement, the comments on their news feed from social media was nothing but one hate attack right after the other against the Christian church. The Christian church was ran down, constantly taking the blame for the federal Supreme Court not giving the gay rights movement their agenda. As in Nazi Germany, where the movement at that time, being leftist, was promoting the gay agenda to the point that they had a gay regiment in their army referred to as the Brown Shirts, of which helped de-Christianize Germany and again try to scapegoat and stigmatize Christians and Jews over Judaic law, not believing homosexuality to be an acceptable lifestyle, being classified as a sin. This was used to de-Christianize Nazi Germany and to turn the population against the Jewish people because of the worship of the Jewish God and His law. We see that here in America right now. It's not just radical leftist groups like the MTSU Student Pagan Group. I saw it on every news story stream that came across my social media outlets. It was nothing but Christian bashing, stirring up hate against the Christians and Jews here in the United States. This is what revisionist history has caused. We have our own Nazi youth now, unfortunately. You can thank the Democratic liberal media and the liberal teachers' unions on the Democratic Party membership list for censoring out the truth. The revisionist history about Nazi Germany being a New Age, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish movement, rather than the new lie that they've brought out that the Nazis were supposed to be Christian, leaving out the facts that they had big Bible burnings in their country and that they were a large socialist nation that supported Karl Marx. We have vast ignorance in our school system today, and it's due to this liberal Democrat revisionist history. The liberal Democrats brought in these, quote, hate speech laws. And even though our federal Supreme Court overturned these hate speech laws as unconstitutional censorship and upheld our legal rights to debate the issue, the mere fact that the Democrats wanted Bible censorship on Romans chapter 1 should show you how closely akin it was to the Nazi good speak laws, coming from the same liberal group, the gay agenda. Most people, when they look back at Nazi Germany, are only taught to believe that the gays and lesbians were walked into the concentration camps with the Jews and Christians. But what they're not telling you is that for years, They used the gays and lesbians to stir up anti-Christian hate. It wasn't until Adolf Hitler decided that it was a defective gene that caused homosexuality and that it should be weeded out of the gene pool did he finally put them in the concentration camps, but by then 6 million Christians had already been killed as the resistance. Then they brought in the gays and lesbians and the Jewish people. Revisionist history has not helped America. We need the truth out there, and we need it now. They overturned the hate speech law so that we can tell this truth right now, today, so that our youth will not be propagandized with Nazi propaganda. Again, the student pagan organization at MTSU was quoting straight out of the pre-Nazi Germany newspapers that how arrogant the Jews and Christians were to think that they had the only God and that we had the, quote, only path to God. That is Nazi propaganda, along with the belief in, quote, redistribution of the wealth that came out of Karl Marx's book Das Kapital, the foundation of the National Socialist Party in Nazi Germany. We have the legal right to debate the issue. Stand up and tell the truth now, and teach your children the truth, even if the school system does not. The anti-Christian hate in America is coming from the radical liberal left, which is now the mainstream Democratic Party. Again, get on any news feed, on any story about gay rights or any other liberal issue, abortion or same-sex marriage, and read the comments that people have posted. It's nothing but anti-Christian hate. This country's supposed to have freedom straight across the board. That's freedom for Christians too. Our federal Supreme Court had to overturn the hate speech laws because they were targeting Christians, just like the Good Speak laws targeted the Christians and Jews in Nazi Germany. This is about religion. It was in Nazi Germany. Keeping in mind the Democratic Party platform is so similar to the Nazi Party platform in environmentalism, gun control, socialism, it's straight down the line the same. The Democrats and liberals always want it to be, quote, oh, all paths lead to God. We all worship the same God and just call him by different names. Even Obama said this during the mosque at 9/11 debate. Keeping in mind, this is Nazi propaganda because it's always that every religion out there is acceptable except for Christianity and Judaism, as they're, quote, too divisive, or they're hated because they think they've got the only God. That's straight out of the Nazi Germany newspapers, folks. Keep that in mind. The 700 Club aired a clip of the World Council of Churches meeting, and in this session, they stood up and hailed the speaker for saying fundamentalist Christianity was now to be considered the enemy. Islam stood up and hailed it all through the World Council of Churches, and there were Wiccans right there on the church pews jumping up and screaming and yelling at how great they thought that was. Only two people stood up and left, a Baptist preacher and an Orthodox Jewish minister. They got up and walked out the door. They saw Nazi Germany in its infancy at the World Council of Churches. Accept any religion but Christianity or Judaism. They're too fundamentalist. They think they've got the only path to God. Straight out of the Nazi Germany newspapers. This is a false teaching, and it needs to be ended here in the United States and combated with the truth. The speaker that stood up at the World Council of Churches saying that Christians are now to be considered the enemy was none other than Ted Turner. This was aired on the 700 Club broadcast. Keeping in mind, the only two people to disagree with this ideology was a Baptist minister and an Orthodox Jew. The rest of the room, full of Wiccans, New Agers, and Islam, jumped up and hailed this. Remember, it's too close to Nazi Germany for comfort. We've got to bring this country back to a biblical moral standard, and it begins by stopping this revisionist history from liberal Democrats who have taken control of our schools and our media. Ted Turner owned our media for years, and it was nothing but anti-Christian censorship and revisionist history, and we're now the fruits of their labor where they have de-Christianized the United States. has been another edition of Carrie Geren Scoggins' Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition Update. Look for more information, Carrie Geren Scoggins' Political Newsletter and Carrie Geren Scoggins' Political Newsletter, Bible Prophecy Times Edition.